In this video, I'm going to show you several reverb plugins that come stock with Pro Tools. Let's check it out. On the screen, you see the Air Reverb plugin. This is one of my favorite stock reverb plugins. There are 5 main knobs and a center section. The most important knob is the mix knob. If you are placing the reverb directly on a track, this knob will allow you to blend the dry unaffected signal and the wet reverb signal. Let's hear it. I'm going to leave this at about 28% for now, so we can still hear the reverb, but it doesn't overpower the violin totally. Now, on top here is the reverb time. The longer the reverb time is set, the longer the reverb lasts. Be careful cranking the knob all the way to the right, as it's set to an infinity setting that will never stop. And that's useful for special effects and things like that, but it's really not useful for mixing. The balance knob sets the balance between the early reflections and the tail. There are different parts to reverb. The early reflections would be, in the real world, the reflections that bounce off nearby reflective surfaces. The tail would be the reflections that are a combination of bounces from around the room or the space you're in. So an early reflection will be a little more direct and a tail will be a little more diffuse. Let's listen to the difference. When you set it more to the tail, it's a little hazier. On the left-hand side here, we have Predelay. Predelay sets the amount of time before the onset of the reverb. You can crank the predelay all the way up to a quarter second, 250 milliseconds, and you will hear a noticeable time difference between the onset of the dry sound and the onset of the reverb. And finally, room size is exactly what it sounds like. It mimics the size of a room, so a smaller room would have less reverb than a larger room in general. Now the center section here gives you a wide range of options for sculpting the sound of the reverb. You can adjust the spread of the early reflections, the width going in and out of the plug-in, and some delay for that wideness or that spreading wideness. You can adjust room properties, ambience, and density. And finally, at the bottom, there's an EQ section where you can adjust how high frequencies and low frequencies are handled in the reverb algorithm. Now, if we go to another plug-in, you will see many of the same parameters. For instance, Deverb on this guitar track. Again, we see a decay, that's similar to reverb time in Air Reverb. There is a smaller EQ section, high frequency cut and a low pass filter. There's a mix knob for dry and wet blend. And there's Predelay. There's also diffusion, which is similar to some of the other settings in Air Reverb, even if they're not called that. The in-out width, the ambience, density, all of that goes into a diffusion setting in Deverb. Deverb is a little less flexible than Air Reverb. There are also a series of buttons at the top to give you different algorithms to mimic what it would be like if you were in a large hall, a church, in a room, or if you were using a reverb plate, which we can talk about some other time. For each one of these buttons, there is a small, medium, and large setting. And then, of course, you can adjust these parameters to your taste. Let's listen to how this guitar sounds in a medium hall. A little too wet, bring that. You can really change the sound of a track by the type of reverb and the settings you use. Nonlinear reverb is an algorithmic reverb that does not conform or try to mimic a real space. It has this interesting reverse button, which you can play with. But the main reason I'm showing this to you is so you can see how it has most of the same parameters: reverb time, a mix knob, dry delay, and pre-delay. So you can actually delay the dry sound and you can delay the reverb sound. There's also a diffusion and width section and a bare bones EQ section here in nonlinear reverb. Moving on, we have spring reverb with, again, some of the same settings: reverb time, mix, pre-delay, diffusion, width, and only one EQ knob, a low cut, so you can cut the low frequencies out of the reverb sound. The final plugin we're going to look at is Reverb 1. This is an Avid plugin, and it has a lot of parameters. So it has a reverb time, it has a size and diffusion setting, it has spread. There is a pre-delay section here where you can shape the attack, decay, and threshold. And there is a whole section dedicated to early reflections. There's also a chorus section, which we will go over in a separate video later. And there is a width section. It also has a dry, wet control. And at the bottom here, it has a fully parametric 3-band EQ that you can use to sculpt the sound even further. Every reverb plugin is going to have its own sound and characteristics and quirks, but in general, many of the parameters are the same from plugin to plugin.